Warning: this video is rated PG-13 for strong language and adult themes. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome back to the Dave the Barbarian episode-by-episode retrospective. I'm continuing to revisit my old favorite show and see how it holds up. If you're new here, be sure to check out the series intro video, which will tell you everything you need to know about the series and get you up to speed. That way I don't have to keep repeating myself over and over. With that said, today we're taking a look at episode 14, Beauty and the Zit. I can't tell you if this was intended as the second episode overall, however, it was the second segment of the episode that had the intended pilot, Way of the Dave, so I'm under the assumption that this was the intended second episode, or segment. Boy, it sure is confusing going back and forth and referring to these as segments and episodes. Well, as far as the episodes go, the relevance of what the first segment is in relation to the second segment ends after this. The only reason that I need to switch between calling them segments and episodes is simply because this is the second segment in the episode which also has the series pilot, so you can't discuss one without discussing the other. The fact that this is the second segment of the pilot episode is also the reason why I'm skipping straight to episode 13 and 14, because for some reason the pilot episode was the 7th episode as far as air date is concerned. Was anybody actually able to follow that? Well, anyways, this episode was written by John Bank, I think that's how it's pronounced, and Rob Humphrey, who tag-teamed 4 episodes total. Before I rewatched this episode, I remembered it being cheesy and an overall weak product when compared to the quality of this series. Does that still hold true? Let's find out. I like the dramatic monologue from the narrator as it starts.
There is a night so horrific that few dare speak its name. A night so filled with terror that brave men whimper like frightened antelopes. A night when fierce creatures prey upon the weak. A night known as...
Should I wear the pink boots or the fuchsia ones?
The annual Barbarian Ball.
But after that, I think the scene's just kinda bleh. Yeah, if I'm being honest, this opening scene seems kinda weak. It's just a bland expositional scene without too many funny zingers. There are a few good lines, don't get me wrong, but the overall product from the start just leaves me cold. But this is the very first scene, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. And there's an immediate point in favor of this episode being intended as the canonical second episode because Uncle Oswich introduces the running joke of nutlogs like this.
They're gonna have those nutlogs I like!
The way he says that implies that this is the first time we're supposed to be hearing about it because otherwise he wouldn't have called them the nutlogs he likes, he'd be calling them just nutlogs. Then Dave goes on about hats. Seriously, what is with this pair of episodes and hats? Anyways, Candy goes on and on about her date with some guy named Hank Scroggle at the Barbarian Ball.
Heir to the Scroggle Lint Mines. Hank is so dreamy. He's suave, handsome, charming, sweet. What more could a girl want?
How about somebody who doesn't have little twiggy arms and smell like rancid yak butter?
Thank you, Fang, for killing that bit harder than a stillborn child on the hospital floor because it was going nowhere. I told you this video would have adult themes.
Why didn't you believe me?
Anyways, we get introduced to the episode plot finally. I say finally, but it's only been like a minute, but this scene has felt like 12 years, and right from the beginning this episode is proving itself to not be very snappy at all. The plot as it sits is that Candy has a hideous zit on her forehead, and so Uncle Oswich uses a little bit of bippity-boppity-boo to zap the zit, and it bounces away like a space hopper for ants. I can't see how this could go anything but well. Dun dun dun! But I also skipped over the highlight of the episode so far.
Hey, look! It's the Pillaging Illustrated swimsuit issue!
Move your hand 1 inch closer and you'll be pulling back a stump.
Damn, Candy, that's hardcore. Also, it's worth noting that the spell that Oswich uses to destroy the zit, or make it go away, is thus.
Benzoyl peroxide!
Did you catch that? The spell is benzoyl peroxide. I thought that sounded familiar, and cleverly, it's an actual treatment for acne. How convenient that the most powerful spell known to man is also a treatment for acne. Anyway, we're off to the races as far as the plot is concerned, and the ball goes as well as you could expect. I love how the narrator describes this ball as well.
It seems as if all of Udragoth has come to drink cheap fruit punch and stand around awkwardly.
That's hilarious. And it's obvious he's just describing it that way so they don't have to animate much within the ballroom, but it's a clever way to cut costs while making a joke out of what amounts to nothing happening. Honestly, it's also a good description of how most of the social functions I've been to go down. Just awkward stammering because nobody wants to be the first to get on the dance floor. Although I did go to an Iranian wedding once, and those people know how to party. I'd worn myself out on the dance floor at one point, so I went back to my seat to rest, and I swear this is true. The bride came over and grabbed my arm and dragged me back to the dance floor. For the record, I wasn't even the one getting married. Having experienced that, it's a shame that Udragoth doesn't have big balls. One part of this ball scene that absolutely blindsided me was this.
May I have your hat, sir?
It's madam.
I don't mean to lampshade this, it's just kinda shocking that this show, in its second episode, either had a transgender character or a character that isn't transgender, but easily could be considered such. It's just crazy that based on a modern day perspective where outrage is at the tip of everyone's tongue, that you could do something like this not too long ago and nobody would bat an eye. Then Lula says what we're all thinking.
What is it with you and hats? There is definitely something very wrong with you.
Anyways, I'm taking too long here, but so is the episode itself, so let's just cut to the chase. The date that Candy was looking forward to with Hank, whatever his name is, does not go well. He's an aloof douche that treats her like she doesn't even exist, so his unnecessary hostility boils over and Candy's about to cry. But in that moment...
Oh yeah!
Oh my god, it's Majin Buu! Holy crap, 2 episodes in and already 2 Dragon Ball Z references. I'm not even really a fan of that series. It's taken a bit longer than I'd like, but Candy gets kidnapped by Majin Zit, so now the rest of the family has to find and rescue Candy from the Zit. If I could give a general summary of my opinions on the episode so far, it's really not endearing itself to me. As I've implied, the episode's not paced particularly well. Even though it only took a few minutes, it feels like it takes way too long to get to the point, and the humor is way more missed than hit than in the previous episode. There's been some good physical humor and a few funny lines, but a lot of these jokes have been falling flat. Like immediately after this great bit of physical humor where the Zit's roar is so loud that it knocks Dave right out of his clothes, which is probably at least someone's sexual awakening, you have this really cringeworthy joke where it's implied that Hank shits himself.
Do something!
I think I just did.
That's beneath you, Dave the Barbarian. That's worse than the fourth wall break from the previous episode. That's the type of entry-level humor that you'd expect in something like Johnny Test. So the humor's not so great, and the plotline so far hasn't been good enough to justify the less than stellar comedic writing. Once again, I repeat myself, I understand that this is a show aimed at young kids, but having watched this entire series, I expect a lot more out of it because normally it's a lot more clever and witty than this, as demonstrated multiple times within the same episode and even immediately after this.
Later, in a cave outside Udragoth.
You know what I hate most about eating people?
When their shoes get caught in your teeth?
Bingo.
Excuse me, have either of you gentlemen seen a princess and a giant Zit around?
You want the next cave over.
Like, that's a really clever subversion of the narrator trope, having characters directly refer to him and direct him as if he doesn't know what's going on. It's almost a fourth wall break, but not quite, because they're not referring to anything that exists outside of the show itself, because the narrator himself is part of the show. Well, anyways, after that, we end up in the cave where the Zit took Candy. This is where things get a bit weird. This is probably the best scene so far. The Zit does a solid 30 seconds or so of evil cackling. It's one of those drawn out jokes like in Austin Powers where the punchline is how long they can keep it going. But he can only cackle for so long and eventually has to talk to his prisoner. It turns out that he's a big ol' softy at heart and is tragically in love with Candy. He also has this weird Spaniard voice.
You're not going to take my candy away from me again.
He says his name, but his accent is so thick that I don't actually understand what he's saying.
I am Sebastius T. Weishaupt, but you can call me Zit.
Yeah, can somebody transcribe that for me? Regardless, we finally get to the point of the episode. As you can probably tell by the name of the episode, Beauty and the Zit, this episode is somewhere between a loving tribute and a parody of Beauty and the Beast. So naturally, Candy and the Zit fall in love. Oh no, it's a love montage. Jesus Christ, I hate these things.
A love that's old as cheese.
Oh god, she's singing. Why is she singing? Nope, I'm tapping out. Skipping ahead. After what feels like an eternity, we finally get to the climax. We get a bit of action that's intended as more of a slapstick routine than actual action. It's a good, if short, little sequence. Afterwards, Dave runs away, and apropos of nothing, shows up with Zit Cream.
Fear not, I have returned with Zit Cream.
Whoopie-dingle-doo. That stuff never works.
Oh no? Well, this is new and improved Zit Be Gone.
That's funny, but a bit of a contrived Deus Ex Machina that just came out of nowhere. The Zit gets sprayed with Zit Cream and slowly dwindles to nothing. Then...
I was really starting to fall for him. He was so kind, so thoughtful, so sensitive.
Oh god, she's crying now. Skipping ahead again. After that, the episode quickly concludes with a so-so joke.
I've got a piece of lettuce stuck in my teeth. Uncle Oswich, can you get it out with your magic?
You betcha.
And that was episode 2/episode 14, Beauty and the Zit. Yowie wowie, that was not good. If I'm being honest, I remembered this episode not being very good by the standards of the series based on my faded memories from years ago, but I did not remember it being flat out bad. Humor-wise, I put this episode on roughly equal footing, if not slightly lower than the previous episode, but as far as everything else, it's so far down the totem pole it's not even funny. What is it that this episode does wrong? Well, first of all, I think the pacing is just off. Even though the episode is only 11 minutes long, it feels like it takes forever and a day to get to the point, but then it concludes way too quickly. I think part of this has to do with the fact that they wasted a pretty significant amount of valuable time in two sequences. The part where the Zit is cackling for a solid 30 seconds, and then the musical bit ate up precious time that could have been used to develop the story further or add to the ending sequence. What's funny is the ballroom sequence didn't even take up that much time, but it still felt way too long. Hank was being way too hostile for no reason, and so it felt like it was just contrivedly setting up the conflict of the episode. Part of the pacing issue in my estimation is that when they are doing these scenes, the jokes aren't fast-paced enough, and so the episode drags as a result of them not having great fast-paced comedic writing or timing. At least as far as the standards of the series is concerned. Like I previously stated, more of a subtle comedy doesn't need to have jokes happening all the time, but in a more screwball comedy where the story takes a backseat to the humor, the jokes have to be coming constantly. Dave the Barbarian is absolutely a screwball-style comedy show. The quality is dictated by the pace, and if the pace drops, then the entire episode suffers. Don't get me wrong, there were some great zingers, and there was some great physical humor in this episode. The humor just didn't quite feel all there. And the humor that fell flat really fell flat, to the point that I found myself cringing at times, and if I'm cringing at what you're writing, maybe it's time to go back to the drawing board. The point is, I had to skip ahead twice in this episode because it was too painful to watch. Considering that this was once my favorite show, that's not exactly a good sign. And while the whole seeing the inner beauty of someone who is ugly theme is tried and true in media, it felt so half-baked here. That and the fact that the conflict in the end wound up being a big nothing sandwich. It was a big misunderstanding that Candy didn't have a chance to explain away before they defeated the Zit. While I don't think any of this is an excuse, I will concede that this was likely very early in the series from a production standpoint, so they were still getting a feel for how these characters worked and how the entire presentation worked. But still, this episode was a hard one to get through. It may have only been 11 minutes long, but it felt like an eternity. So I have no choice but to give this episode an ultra-subjective score of 2 out of 10. I'm not going to give it a 1 because at the very least there was still some great lines, but for the standards that I expect out of the series, and even just in general, this episode was just bad. It's funny, going into this episode I didn't expect it to be as bad as it was. I distinctly remember there being one episode in particular that I remember being absolutely awful, but for now, Beauty and the Zit is the episode to beat as far as worst episode. So now that we have the pilot episodes out of the way, we have nowhere to go but up. From this point forward, we're going to be going by air date as opposed to production date. So next time, we're going to be going back to episode 1, the Maddening Sprite of the Stump, the episode that I probably watched more than any, but only because it's the one that aired the most for some reason. Until then, if you like what you see here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, and leave a comment if you wish. That way maybe I can finally find love, or at the very least someone willing to work cheap. You've been watching Tactical Bacon Productions. See you next time. Peace.